Welcome to For the Health of It, an intimate look at public health in Cowley County, Kansas. Join us as we discuss topics that are impacting public health in our community and learn about what we do at your local health department. Welcome once again, everybody, to another edition of For the Health of It Cowley County, as we take an in-depth look of all things public health in our region. This is Tom Langer from the City-Cowley County Health Department. I'm the Administrator and Public Health Officer in the county. And with me today, as always, is the lovely Allie. How are you, kiddo?
I'm well.
Yeah, it got cold overnight, didn't it?
Yes, finally. It's October.
It's October, yeah. We went from summer to, hard fall just right now.
Yeah, but a week ago it really was 92.
Yeah. I'm glad it's here. You know why? Because it reminds me of something that as these seasons change, that's I think one of the most important things and topics on everybody's mind, or it should be on everybody's mind, and that is that reminder that if you have not yet received your annual flu immunization, get your flu shot now. Now is the time to do it, right?
Oh, yes.
It's
the perfect time.
It is the perfect time. And I mean, you know, it is as American as $1 gas, cheap groceries, and national pride. I mean, if you have those things, then you have to be able to get behind the flu shot. The flu shot will not hurt. The flu shot will not give you the flu. And the flu shot certainly is effective in keeping influenza away during the next 5 to 6 months when we are going to be faced with it once again. So that is my shameless pitch to everybody. If you have not received that, get it. Get into the health department. We have them available for you. Meet us at one of our drive-up clinics or whatever we have going on in the community. It's time for you to roll up your sleeve and get that one thing. That is the one thing I hope everybody in this community can get behind. So the real topic of today's session is, the poop on poop. We're going to be talking about something that most people generally do not want to talk about, probably do not want to think about, and that is wastewater, especially if you are a county resident and you do not live within an incorporated community that has public water and sewer systems. Because a good number of people in our county have homes that either rely upon well water or rural water for their drinking water in their homes, but they all have some sort of private wastewater system at their home. And what exactly is a private wastewater system?
In Cowley County, we'd say a private wastewater system would be a septic system or a lagoon.
Right on, a septic system or a lagoon. And we'll talk about both and some of the things that we do, because what a lot of people do not understand is that the health department has jurisdiction in the county to make sure that wastewater systems are installed and operated correctly, and that we have certain times during their life cycles when we are directly engaged in inspection of those systems, what that means, how it is accomplished, and what happens if things go sideways. And with the holidays coming up, and a lot of folks may be going to see mom or dad, on the farm and things like that, and all of a sudden, instead of there just being 2 people in the house, we now have 10 or 12 that are all there for the weekend. Those systems get put under a lot of stress, and nobody wants to hear that, wonderful outcry of, oh my gosh, the toilet's not flushing, as we're waiting for kickoff on Thanksgiving Day. So we're going to talk a little bit about prepping for that and all of the things that go into it. So we do a lot of that work. I think we'll start by making sure everybody truly understands in the most simple forms what we're talking about. If you live in town, if you live in a city, and you've lived there all your life, you consider 2 things. That when I turn my faucet on, or I start my bath or my shower, and I turn that handle, water comes out. And then the other thing is that it goes down the drain. And when you go to the toilet, you flush that little handle, and that thing swooshes around, and everything goes bye-bye, and you think nothing else about it. If you live in a rural setting, and you have your own septic system, be it a septic tank or a lagoon, you have to maintain that system, because when you flush that stool or you watch that water go down the drain, you still own it. It is your responsibility. And most people don't realize that. They think, oh, it's gone, out of sight, out of mind, until all of a sudden things don't work right, and you have a swamp maybe out in the backyard, or you smell an incredibly bad odor, or things just are gurgling and sounding like some kind of a Halloween movie nightmare, and that's what we want to make sure does not happen, and why we talk about how important it is. We'll start at the very, very beginning. Allie, if you were going to be buying a piece of property in Cowley County and you wanted to build your dream home on that piece of property, what's one of the things you'd be looking at doing?
Well, I would need to make sure I knew what wastewater system I was going to have installed.
Exactly
I
right.
plan to have running water.
You're going to have a plan, right? You're going to
Yes.
you're going to get somebody to work with you, and they're going to put, they're going to have a blueprint for your house, and you're going to figure out where you want it to sit on the lot and all that good stuff, right?
Oh, yeah.
And you're going to have to run utilities to it, which means you're going to get either propane or natural gas coming to it, or and in most cases, combination electrical and water. You're gonna find out, hey, is there a water line nearby? Who is that water supplier? They're gonna have to run pipes, set a meter so you can connect your house to it, and then you got to say, okay, where does that water coming in go out? And that is where the health department comes in, because you would contact us, and they would request what?
A permit.
A permit. And a permit is like, oh, okay, great. But what do we do when we look at that process? I mean, it's more than just saying, hey, Allie, I'm building a house and I need a permit.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
Right? So there's a whole lot of steps that go along into that. And some of the things that we ask are, okay, tell us about what you're going to build. Show us your site plan, right? And we take a look at that. And then we ask a little bit about, well, where's it going to be and who are your contractors and all of that good stuff. And we set generally an appointment. And at that appointment, yours truly goes out and visits with you, because you're going to be building, you're going to be the person that's building it. And you are going to say, well, we want to build it here. And I'm going to say, well, okay, let's look at the dirt, right? And we do something. We require that we determine at that point in time what the carrying capacity of the soils are. Because in reality, all of the water and such that comes in and all of the stuff it eventually goes back to the earth. And so we need to know what's the carrying capacity of the surface soils, and how much water can they hold? Where does it run to? Do you have surface water on your property, like a pond or a creek or a drainage, things of that nature? And then we have to think forward and saying, what would happen if we put a lagoon here in a certain spot, or if we put a septic system in the ground? Because the water that goes into those tanks has to eventually leave. And there's two distinct differences between the lagoon system and a septic tank, right?
Yes. You just hit on it.
There's two of them. The lagoon is an interesting deal. I think people have seen these. If you may not have one, but if you've driven around in the country, you might have seen them. They're like a little square pond near people's property, or on people's properties, generally near their houses, not like right next to it. They're going to be within a couple 100 feet or so away from the property. And that is a pond that basically a pipe runs from the house to that pond, and that everything that goes out that waste line goes through that pipe into that pond. And that is just exactly what happens. So it takes all of the solids and everything in it and puts it in that pond. And those ponds have to be maintained. Those lagoons have to meet specific standards on how they are built, how they are maintained. They have to have a certain level of water in them at all the time. And this is where we see at the county level generally the greatest number of problems. Is that either they weren't designed properly to begin with, they have not been properly maintained, and therefore everything that can go wrong does go wrong, and you have a really nice mess on your hands if it's not properly maintained. Allie, do you know what the requirements are for maintenance on a lagoon? They're generally what shape?
A square-ish, kind of like you said.
They're like 40 by 40 or 45 by 45 or 50 by 50. Those are the different sizes that they will be called out. And they have the berms on them around, like little dirt dikes all the way around it, and they are self-contained. They are enclosed. You can't,
Gated fences.
nothing drains out of it, right? And they have to be fenced in, and they have to be fenced in and have a gate on those, and then they have to be maintained where nothing is allowed to grow other than grass on the berms. And those berms need to be maintained. They have to be mowed down, and you're not supposed to put leaves or grass clippings or anything in that lagoon water, because all that does is really muck things up for you. And you don't want to have cattails or vegetation growing in it, and you certainly don't want trees growing around your lagoon. I have been out to do inspections on a lot of properties, especially when people transfer property, when they're selling it. And we call this stuff out all the time, that those lagoons, people don't want people to see them. And so they'll plant like ornamental grasses or stuff around them, and that's the worst thing you can possibly do.
Yeah, and this is actually one of my, I don't want to say favorite things about this type of wastewater system, but the science in me does appreciate it.
Yeah.
Because we're talking about these as wastewater treatment systems,
Right.
and part of that definitely relies on the environment, and the oxygen, and the potential for photosynthesis to occur. And so if your area is overgrown and it's not getting the sunlight and the wind it needs, your system's not going to function properly.
Doesn't work right. That's exactly right. And people say, oh, well, we don't want to see it. One of the craziest things was we had somebody say, we didn't even know we had one.
Oh, yes.
And I'm like, where did you think everything was going?
They had lived on the property for years.
Several years.
Yeah.
And we didn't even know we had one. And that is exactly the kind of thing that we want to make sure we avoid, because people, you have to maintain these things the right way in order for them to function the way they're supposed to, and for you to really enjoy being able to live in your house the way you want to. You don't want to have, animals being able to graze and walk on the berms because they'll knock them down. You certainly, like I say, don't want trees growing in there. When you build one of these things, the most important consideration is will it be constructed properly to where it holds water? I can tell you honestly, I have had to go out and talk with folks who have had lagoons built and installed that were not properly done, that never held water. And if they don't have water in there, then
can't work.
Then guess what you've got? You've got a pipe that is basically putting raw human sewage on the surface, even though it's inside of a pit. It's right there on the ground. And let me tell you what, that is not good. And when wintertime comes, like we're going to be getting cold now, those pipes will freeze up, and it's going to clog, and it's going to back up into the house. People, you've got to understand how that thing functions. And if you do not understand what you're supposed to do, then we will give you another shameless pitch. Contact us at the health department. We've got the information. We've got the guidance. We'll come out and take a look, even if we need to, and help you figure out what's going on to make sure that your system works properly. We have been going through a really prolonged dry period. We had a little bit more rain this year than we've had the last 2 or 3. But what's it been? Maybe 4 or 5 years since we've seen a wet year in and around the county. And the problem is, especially with houses that maybe are no longer housing full families, that we're not putting enough water into the tank, into the system, to maintain the water level. The water level is supposed to be between 3 and 5 foot, no more than 5. But you need at least 3. You have to make sure that you have water that's up high enough that it's covering that inflow pipe. That inflow pipe into a lagoon is going to be just below the bottom, at least a foot, maybe 1.5 foot, even 2 foot sometimes, off the bottom. That pipe then drains, and there's a splash pad beneath it. Not the type that the kids go playing in the summer times, but a pad where the solids would hit that and then disperse. And then that water in that lagoon has to stay up over that pipe high enough so that the solids can settle, the aerobic action can take place, the sunlight can penetrate it, the wind can agitate the surface and keep it oxygenated. Come on, help me.
Oxygenated?
Oxygenated, thank you. All that education, I still can't talk. Anyway, it keeps it to where it works properly. You asked me a question one time, well, do people ever need to worry about removing solids, the stuff from a lagoon. And I said, well, yes, if it's really, really old and it's been there for a long time and it's functioned properly, or if it has not been maintained. And leaves, grass clippings, all kinds of stuff, cattails, all of that compostable material were to fall into that lagoon. It's not supposed to be there. And all that does is fill up that bottom. And in those situations, a person may have to have it dredged out, or they may have to have it dried out and then rebuild a lagoon. So you don't want those things occurring. And you've got to make sure that you maintain these things because, again, like I say, you don't want to have that holiday surprise. And the same holds true on the septic tank site. We were talking about when you build a house or you're buying a house is when we will take a look at these systems really very closely because we go out and actually inspect them. Number one, we want to make sure that if you're selling a property in our county, that the system is working as it was designed to. Amazingly, a lot of people who have septic tanks do not put their tank on a systematic schedule to have solids removed from the tanks. And that is something that you absolutely have to do. If you're building a house in Cowley County today, the minimum tank size that we would allow you to put in is 1,000 gallons. That's the smallest tank, and that's like a tank that has two 500-gallon chambers in it. You can go online and take a look at our webpage, and you will see pictures of the things we're talking about. But it could be 1,000 gallon, it could be 1,200, it could be 1,500 gallon, depending upon the size of the property and the number of people living there and what the house is designed for. But if you do not properly have the solids removed from the bottom of that tank on a periodic basis, and by periodic I mean every 48 to 60 months, 4 to 5 years, depending upon the tank, you're going to have that perhaps fill up eventually. It will not have the capacity anymore to hold, and then you will have problems with the tank. What that means is you're going to contact one of the local septic haulers. They'll come out. They will open the tank up, put the big vacuum down in it, and they vacuum it all out. While they're there, they can inspect the inside of the tank to make sure there's no cracks in the sidewalls, things like that would cause problems down the road. And you have the confidence in that system that it's properly functioning and it all works probably, because the two areas you could have failure in a septic system is either in that tank itself or in the absorption field. And that's that pipe that exits the tank after all of the solids have settled, and it takes that gray water out of the tank through a pipe down into an area that is predetermined based upon the carrying capacity of the soil, and into an area where it distributes that water evenly over an area into the ground where further aerobic action occurs and it is absorbed into the soil, and the nutrients go up into the plants. That's why a lot of times, especially when it's been dry, you will see properly functioning absorption fields or fields like that have these green lines in them, where the grass is always greener over certain parts of the absorption field. Those are the nitty-gritty things about septic systems, but people need to understand where we get involved and why. And why is it a big thing? Well, sadly, I will tell you that we have come across properties in our county that are older, very rural, that were constructed perhaps before the wisdom of on-site wastewater system and the management of the same has advanced as far as it is today. And so I have come across some places where we have had basically 4-inch pipes coming out of the side of a hill along a stream.
Oy.
Oy is right. And people say, oh no, that certainly can't happen. Oh yeah, it does. And it does exist right here in our county. And it's
not the proper treatment of wastewater.
It's not what we want, because what happens with that is basically those solids get discharged right onto a creek bank. And then every time we do have a rain and the water comes up, we're flushing all of those wastes right into that creek. And those creeks go down either into the rivers or in some situations into local watersheds and even lakes for drinking water. And there's one of those that's located not too far from where we live in the county, a city whose name begins with a W, and they have a lake just up to the north and east a little bit, and there are a whole lot of houses, older homes up in those areas where we did it. I came across one. It was a building that was built at the turn of the century, and I'm not talking the current one, I'm talking the one previous. Beautiful limestone old building. People were coming in and they were going to buy this and turn it into a hunting lodge, which we have a lot of that goes on around Cowley County. So we go up there and we're doing our due diligence and we're checking out the system, and we follow the pipe and we see that it comes out of a bank across a little creek arm, and on the opposite bank was the lagoon. But the lagoon was in the floodplain of that stream. And that stream, when it would flood, washes right down in to Winfield City Lake. And so, we had to say, no, this system's not conforming. We're no longer going to even allow something like that to happen. But it does. And so that's why we do those things. People sometimes say, oh, these are just silly inspections, and you guys just want it for the permit fee. And I'm like, man, it doesn't even cover the cost of the time that we spend reviewing this stuff. It's basically to make sure that we are doing our job in protecting the water supply for the people that live here in the county. The other thing is, if you are on a piece of property where you are going to have to rely upon well water for your drinking water, you need to know how far away does my septic system and that absorption field need to be from where my wellhead sits. Because if you're pumping water out of the ground, but you're also putting water back into the ground, it never wants to be upstream from where that well is. So those are all things that we look at and come into play in this wonderful environmental health portion of what we do. So people want to know, how do we engage the health department for this help? Well, it's pretty simple. Number one, if you're selling a property, if you say you're selling your house on your own, remember, you still have to have an inspection performed. And there is a website that we have, and there is all of the forms to request the health department's assistance, be it a residential inspection when you're selling a home, or a wastewater permit application, or a well test, and then we'll talk about those too. You can go right on there, and we have a direct email that those forms attach to, and they come directly to the health department, and then we see them and we respond and let you know when we're going to come out. We set up the appointment time and take care of it. And the costs are really quite modest. A permit to build a system is $185. And like I say, that's to make sure that it is designed properly, that it is installed correctly, all of the things that need to happen that the soil profiling is done. People will call up and say, oh, we need to have a perk test. We don't do percolation tests anymore in the county. We do soil profiling. And there's a big difference. A perk test was basically the drilling of a hole about 2 foot in depth, like with a little auger or a spade, that you then would pour water into, and then you would use a watch and you would time it. And you would time to see how long it took for that water to go down into the soil. That was a perk test. Okay, and it had to fall within certain things. But it doesn't really tell you a lot. Now what we do is we have to have the contractor actually come out that's going to be doing the groundwork, and they dig a hole. They dig a hole that's 5 foot deep and at least, a bucket and a half width wide. Because what we look at then is how deep into the soil we need to go to set a septic system. And we get to see all the layers, the topsoil layer and the subsurface layers down through that, so that we can then classify the type of soil, whether it's sandy, whether it's clay, what type of soils there are, and then we can do the calculations for how much water it can absorb and how much water it can properly disperse. And then we know how far apart the different rows have to be to where your waste pipes are out there, how far apart they'll be, and we can actually figure out the size of what we call the absorption field. And we know where those lateral lines are running. And there are 2 different types that people put in nowadays. One is what was the old reliable, what we call rock and pipe. That's where in that channel that gets dug by your contractor, they'll put a thin layer of rock. You have a corrugated pipe that goes into that, and it runs down, a certain number of feet, and then it gets covered up with a little bit of rock and sand, and then the soils go back over that. And then there are also, I think, a lot of what we're seeing now are called chambered systems, and a chambered system is a device that's designed specifically to take wastewater out of a septic system, and disperse it in kind of like an umbrella fashion. Have you ever seen the farm buildings that are like a Quonset hut? You know what I'm talking about, like a rainbow.
Oh yeah.
So that's what these are like. Imagine you have a pipe that's cut in half, and you have half of a pipe, but this isn't a full pipe. It's kind of made out of like a polyethylene, but it looks kind of like a radiator would look. It's got fins in it, and that water goes through it and trickles down those fins, and it gets absorbed by the soils and everything around it. And they are really very, very efficient. They've been using those. It's been industry standard now for at least the last decade, probably longer than that, maybe two. And we see more and more of those going in for septic systems because they're easier to manage. And then you'll also have all of the new things that we require on a septic system. Used to be the old ones were just built and buried, and that was the end of it. And if you ever had to go find it again, if you weren't there when you had it installed, you had no idea where to look. And so now we require, of course, clean outs for the pipes to make it easier for the homeowner to maintain their system both in the house and on the way into the tank. And we do this on lagoons as well. You'll see on those waste lines, whenever there's a bend or a serious change in direction, we're going to require a clean out, which is that white pipe that sticks up out of the ground, and it's going to be surface level, or perhaps, hopefully, a little bit higher than that. And that allows you to be able to go out there and use proper plumbing tools to clean out any kind of clog or anything that might occur in those lines, or to have a plumber take those little cameras that they have now, and they can put them down there and check everything out. So the systems are really much better now than they used to be. If you have a real old home and you don't know where your septic system is, we get calls, we don't know where it's at, and we have to find it. Man, we have to come out with this really sophisticated tool. It looks like a T, and it's made out of like rebar, and we got to go around and stick it, and we're hunting, we're probing around in the ground until we clunk, 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 hit the top of the septic tank, and then we can locate where that's at. The septic haulers do a magnificent job in finding that. Those guys who do that for a living, they can stand there and look at your yard, and it's like they have a sixth sense. They can say, I think it's over here, and you're like, it can't be over there, and they'll go over and clink, clink, boom, they'll find it right away. Meanwhile, I'll be out there for an hour trying to find a dang septic tank. But it's what we do, because as you move into one of those, say you're buying a house that has an existing system, we want you to know where it's at. We want you to be able to understand what you have to do to maintain it. And we really do want you to have a report that comes from us at the time that you're buying the house that says, yeah, we've been out there, we've looked at it, it's functioning properly at that time. It doesn't mean that it's going to be perfect, but at least we know that at the time you bought the property, it was functioning the way it was supposed to be. And that's important, I think, for a lot of folks. We also highly encourage people that are selling their homes, get it pumped. Get it pumped, because that's a amenity for a new homeowner to say, yeah, we had it serviced, we had it inspected, it's good to go. And that makes real good sense.
Yeah.
I wouldn't buy a house without having that done. If I was buying one and it was on a septic system, I would put into the sales contract that the septic system would need to be inspected and pumped, prior to closing. Those are just smart things to do.
So I have some things I'd like to ask you about.
Okay.
There's some things that I've heard of that are maybe a little bit different.
Okay.
One time I was asked a question if it's still recommended to put worms and dead mice down the toilet for your septic tank.
No, we don't recommend that anything goes down that septic system except human waste and appropriate toilet paper.
What about like the flushable wipes?
They're not that flushable. They do not dissolve in water like they're supposed to. If you've ever had the joy of standing at the end of one of those pipes and actually watching what comes through it, Which, hey, it's part of it. We all do this. We all create this. It is, like I say, we own it. If you have that system, it is yours from the time you put it there until the time it ends up there. It's amazing to see how those things work. They have to be designed where you have the right slope so that pipe has enough run to it so that everything's going to get there. You have to actually use enough water every day to make sure your system works. We have a lot of people, oh no, we're not going to let any water in. Sometimes you've got to run some water. If you've got a lagoon, you need to put water in it. We've told some people, you need to add more to it because your lagoon is oversized for your house. And so we have them basically funnel rainwater into it when we have a wet season. But here again, we don't. And so sometimes, like now, if that lagoon's getting low, we're going to say, open up this drain pipe, stick a hose in it, and turn the hose on and put water in your tank. You've got to have that water in there for it to properly function. Same thing happens with a house. But when you consider an individual person, on average, will use between 75 to 100 gallons of water a day at home. Okay, now you think, oh, that's not much. Yeah, and it's right. We're talking about 1,000-gallon tank, and if there's two people living in the house, that means you're going to put 2 to 250 gallons of water into that tank a day. You're not even going to fill that tank up to its capacity in a week. And then we have other times when we have tanks that are undersized, and we'll have large families in a two-bedroom house. We may have 10 people in a two-bedroom house, and they're dumping all kinds of water, and that system it's just overwhelmed. These are the times when we say, "Oh, we got problems." That's when things start backing up, and you say, "Yeah, you got more water in it than it can handle," and so then you have to take a look at those other things, and that's why it's important that these things are inspected the way they are, and that they're maintained. The other thing I want to talk about, Allie, is drinking wells and water. We have a lot of people in the community that rely upon wells, private wells for drinking water. And I know for a fact that they are not being tested often enough. And I really want people to understand, if you have a well, you should have that thing tested annually. You can call the health department. We come out, we'll collect a sample. We have the capacity in our laboratory here at the health department to take a look at the nutrient load, the nitrates that are in that water. We can test the hardness of the water, the pH factor. We can test to see if there's E. coli in the water. And if there is, we can help you make sure that you can chlorinate the well properly to get rid of that thing so you have a safe water supply. It's really, really important if you're living in a rural setting and there's farming going on around you. Think about what's on the surface of the soils and how that water gets into the water table. It's generally from when you have a lot of rain or a wet year, it will go down into the soils, down into that water table, and it pulls a lot of stuff with it. So when we've had seasons when we've had really, really dry years and we're still pulling water out of the well, out of that water table, and that water table begins to shrink, people will call and they will tell us, we think there's something wrong because our water tastes salty, or it has a salty taste to it, or it tastes a little funny. And that's because of the fact that the number of gallons of water that are down in that watershed, or in that water table, they're varying because they're being pulled down by different wells and by natural causes. And so you really do want to make sure that your water supply is safe. I guarantee you, if you're drawing well water out of any well in Cowley County, it's going to be hard. And by that I mean it's going to have a lot of mineral content in the water. But we can kind of classify that for you. And the most important thing is we want to make sure that it is safe for you to drink and bathe in and wash in, things like that. So that test is very, very inexpensive. It costs $40 is all it does, $40 for us to do it. And we recommend people do it once a year. Get into the habit of that, and we'll be more than happy to come out and do that, especially that coliform and E. coli part of it. That's really, really important, and the nitrate loading. Right now, we have we'd received some funding from Kansas Department of Health and Environment, and we've got some money set aside, a few $1,000s, for folks to have their wells tested and have it done free of charge if you've never done it before, or even if you have. I want that money that's set aside for our county residents to be utilized. So if you're interested in getting your well tested, give us a call. We'll come out. The one thing I will tell you is we do not want to take that water sample from inside your house, especially if you have any kind of a filtration system in the home. We want to take it from the well itself, and so we will do that either off of a hydrant or a spigot that is not run through a filtered portion, because we don't want to have any other contaminants that might be there that would give us a false indication of what the true condition of your water in the ground is like. And that's important stuff, especially when we talk about human health. So there you go. That's the poop. Number one, you own it if you have one of these systems. From the time the water comes in until it's out of that tank and back in the ground, it is your responsibility. You are your own wastewater manager, and you've got to make sure that you go out there and you maintain your lagoon properly, and you keep that fence in good shape so that nobody can go out and run and get into it and play. That's the worst thing you'd want to do, is have in-laws come over with kids from town and they've never been out there and they think it's a pond and they want to go play in the pond. Nope, that's not the pond we want people playing in. Keep that thing fenced up, and keep it functioning properly. Make sure it has the right amount of water. We guarantee you there are no fish in that pond. The other thing that again we want to make sure you do is you realize too, if you do have your in-ground system like your septic system, the proper way to maintain that. I'll bet you people don't realize, or a lot of people don't know, where their tank sits and where the absorption field, where the lateral lines run out of that tank. And Allie, did you know that if you have one of those things, you are not supposed to build or even park on those lateral lines?
It makes sense that you shouldn't.
You shouldn't, because any kind of compaction of the soils does not allow those systems to work properly, and what it does is it will lead to a premature failure. Here's another thing, that if you put one in and you're building it, see, I'm going to give you all these little tips. You're putting a new system in, and your lateral line has to cross a driveway. So 4-inch pipe buried under the ground. That pipe has to be sleeved. It has to be put inside of a 6-inch metal pipe underneath that section, because that 6-inch metal pipe will then disperse the weight of traffic going over the top. And a lot of us will go in and out of our driveways a lot. And if we're on a farm, we're not going to just have cars and pickups. We might be having grain trucks, combines, and all kinds of tractors and everything else that we're going to run across it. And we're not going to think about where that stuff is until all of a sudden it's too late, if that cracks or it fails, and then everything backs up on Thanksgiving Day. So we've talked about poop for quite a little bit. Anything else that we need to discuss?
I guess if you want to wrap it up by telling us about any other common pitfalls of these systems and maybe how to avoid some of them, that could be cool.
If you're in the market to buy a property and you're buying an older home, and by older home I mean we're talking about a house that's built, 60s and earlier. Remember, the systems weren't nearly as well designed back then as they are now. We didn't know as much then as we do now. So be really leery of whether or not, you can actually find that and you can locate it. One of the things we talk about now when we put in a brand new system is we require what's called a riser to be put in over the tanks. And a riser is basically, like a little manhole, okay, that identifies where that tank is located, and so that it's going to be easy to know where it's at and easy to service. Those don't occur right now. And if you ever do have to change it or repair it, we're going to require that those things are added at the time of that repair or upgrade. But some of the bad things I've seen is some of the old properties, old ones, where there was basically a pipe that came out of the house and went into, what a cistern is? It's just a hole. Think back a long time ago. How many of you ever went out to go fishing or hunting or somewhere, and you had to go just to what was called a pit toilet?
Oh, yeah.
A pit toilet is a hole, okay, with a stool over the top that had a hole cut in it.
Yeah.
Right? That's a pit toilet. That was the state of the art once upon a time. And that stuff just went down there, and there it was. Well, where was it going? Right down into the end of the earth and then into the water supply and everything else. So some of those still exist. We came across one not too long ago where the family didn't understand why their There's a couple and 4 kids, 6 people, lots of water coming into the system, and they were having all kinds of problems. And we had to have a contractor come out and take a look at it. And we found out why there wasn't a septic tank there at all. It was just basically a hole with a pipe in it, and there was nowhere for that water to go. So they had water coming up to the surface, and it was not fun. So that was one of those situations where, it was bad, but the end result is it was remediated and a new system was put in, and now it's functioning properly like it should. I hate to talk about the horror stories, but they do exist, and I don't want it to happen to anybody that's listening today, especially, like I say, around the holidays. I do know for a fact of a family who did go out and visited mom on the farm, and house was full after it was just her all this time. And by golly, on the 26th day of November, the guy had to come out with a septic hauler and empty that tank. And then found out later that mom needed a new system. So it's happened. It has happened to us. Happened to me. That was one of those things. And so we ended up putting in a new system for mom. And that was not in this county, but in Kansas. So I know that it happens. And I hope it doesn't happen to you. So that's pretty much it. We'll be back again in a few weeks, and we will have all kinds of other things to talk about. Don't forget. The most important thing right now, come on in, get your flu shot. If you're my age and older and you have not had an RSV vaccine, hey, come join me. I'm rolling up my sleeve next week to get that taken care of. I encourage everybody to do that. I have noticed a lot of people walking around already that are sniffling and coughing and such. I have a hunch, I don't know that I can put it into words, but I have a hunch that we may not be in for a easy season this year. I hope I'm wrong, but I know you're tired of COVID, and I know you're tired of hearing people say, go do this and go do that, but this is one thing that, as an adult, please consider it. It is really truthful. Get your flu shot and come see us. We'll take care of you. That's all I got. How about you?
All right. That works.
So then, until next time.
Stay well.
Stay well, everybody. Thanks for listening. Thank you for joining us for this edition of For the Health of It, Cowley County. We hope you found it useful and that you'll tell your friends and give us a listen again during future episodes. As always, we end today's segment by replaying a recent Public Health Minute, which is a weekly radio message focused on keeping you healthy. So, until next time, stay well, everyone. We're getting close to the wintertime. Soon, the shorter days and lower temperatures will be on us, along with more flu infections. Keeping yourself safe is relatively simple. Get your yearly flu shot now. Flu shots offer the best protection available. They significantly lower your chances of getting the infection, and they protect you from multiple strains of the flu. Plus, even if you do get sick from a different strain, your flu shot will ensure that your symptoms are milder and your time spent sick is shorter. However, it'll take up to 2 weeks for your body to develop full immunity following receiving your shot, so now is the best time to get it. Give the health department a call and schedule your appointment before the temperatures get colder and the days grow shorter. Connecting you with the protections that you need is just one more way the health department works hard every day to help you stay well.